trapped in the creepy teacher's room. Teachers can be weird and scary. That's why I'm here to tell you my story. Hey everyone, I'm Melissa, and today I'm going to tell you about how I got trapped in a room with the creepiest teacher in my high school. It began after my teacher was hired. You see, he was fairly new and was only supposed to be working at our school temporarily. Our regular health teacher, Mrs. Marnie, was off on maternity leave, so they hired Mr. Ernie. There was nothing I really had against him. He just gave me the creeps. His eyes were a clear light blue, almost too hollow. It was as if he could see through me and all the other students.
It actually looks like
He had a big gut,
drug dealer.
white patchy hair, and a look of intensity every class period. I wasn't the only one who felt creeped out by Mr. Ernie. 5 other girls from my class rallied up, gossiping about him. They created rumors that he was a horrible person, and that he even tried to lock them in his classroom after school. That just confirmed my suspicions even more, making me want to stay away from any danger. No guys complained about him, thinking he was the funniest teacher ever. They just cracked jokes about his huge sweat stains under his armpits, the way he never seemed to find a barbershop. He let everyone do whatever they pleased, as long as they weren't damaging anything in the classroom. There were so many reasons for the guys to like him, and one very important reason the girls stayed away from him. He was creepy. I never usually listen to rumors, but this one seemed true. And even if it wasn't, what was the harm in staying away? I had good grades, so there was no reason for me to even be speaking to Mr. Ernie. So you can imagine my surprise when he approached me one day while I was packing my book bag. He claimed he wanted to talk to me after class. But I made excuses, telling him I couldn't be late to my next class. If I'd be late again, I'd get an hour of detention. I gave him an apologetic smile and zoomed out of the class so fast I thought my feet would leave behind smoke. I was safe for now. The rest of my classes went by in a blur, and nothing really scary happened at all.
Whoa, that's a lot of time.
I told my guy friends my encounter
Like
with Mr.
days.
Ernie, but they shrugged it off, saying maybe he wanted to talk about one of our assignments. The girls gave me frightened looks, but refused to even comment on why he'd want to speak to me. A teacher couldn't harm a student, could they? That night, once at home and tucked into my blankets, safe from the world, I had a nightmare about health class. The nightmare involved me exploring the classroom in the dark and eventually getting my foot stuck on a desk somehow.
That's the opposite.
This creepy, cold feeling went up my neck as I heard footsteps.
The teacher is Jason.
Heavy footsteps. After a couple of minutes, Mr. Ernie walked into the room with a textbook. He grinned wide, which was odd because I'd never seen him smile at all during class. Without another thought, he slammed the book open and thanked me for coming after hours, claiming that I needed him to get rid of my bad grades. When I woke up that morning, I was sweaty and my heart was pumping fast, but I had no idea why. It wasn't as if the dream was scary enough for me to even be frightened, but there I was, terrified of being in a dark classroom, studying with my health teacher. It was something that haunted me during breakfast hours and the walk to
Comment
school.
below if it's real or not.
Going to his class was something I wouldn't be able to avoid for long, so I made sure to get any excuses prepared in case he asked me to stay after class. I made a bunch of different scenarios in my head, rehearsing what I'd say, keeping a straight face. I couldn't show my fear, or else he'd get suspicious of me. I didn't understand why the thought of him brought me so much anxiety, but I knew how the world was nowadays, and I doubt all of the rumors could be wrong. One of them had to have truth behind it, at least one. So when I walked into his room that afternoon after lunch, I expected the worst to come. He hadn't even glanced my way, too busy scribbling on a yellow notepad and grading papers. All the students sat down and began talking to each other. Like normal, they did whatever they wanted. Some had phones out, others made jokes about TV shows they saw last night. Nobody seemed to take notice of how Mr. Ernie looked. His balding hair was messier than usual, and his eyes were bloodshot. He was mumbling to himself in
He
his
looks
seat
like
angrily. It was like I couldn't
don't
keep
know
my
what he
eyes
looks
away,
like,
observing all of his weird behavior.
creepy.
He'd scratch at his face and glance frantically around the room for a couple seconds, eyes lingering on me any time he'd catch me staring. After that class, I hurried to put away my things once again. My shoes squeaked against the tile floor as I tried to walk out as fast as I could.
Nah, that's
The classroom was starting to get empty, and I definitely didn't want to be the last person out of the room. As I'd expected, Mr. Ernie called out my name.
Oh,
I
you're in
slowly stopped
trouble.
walking and turned to look at him, waiting for him to make his request. Can you imagine my surprise once he opened his mouth and threatened me?
Does not look like
He
a
claimed
human.
he needed to speak with me, and that if I didn't stay after class, I'd have detention and a failed assignment. Who did this guy think he was? You couldn't just give students bad grades just because you wanted to. He was taking advantage of his authority, and of course I had to be the one experiencing this side of him. Unless the stories the other girls told were true, that would mean that they would all be experiencing this. I didn't really have a choice but to stay behind, knowing that I couldn't have detention without getting in trouble with my parents.
Pretty creepy, actually.
I wish one of my friends had waited for me or stayed behind with me, but I was alone in this. He told me to take a seat as I got close to the door. My ears perked up at the sound of him turning the lock on the doorknob. Goosebumps littering my arms.
Shut
This
up!
couldn't be happening to me. My thoughts were frantic as he spoke to me, standing next to the door. I couldn't process anything he was saying, too
like
paranoid
his
to even move a muscle. Why was he blocking the door like that? Why did he lock it? There was no possible reason for him to be locking me in a room with him. I was seriously freaked out, especially because I had that nightmare last night. I was too distracted to even notice him taking steps toward me until he was right in front of me. And by then I was starting to sweat. His lips were moving, but I couldn't hear a word. I think I was having a
Imagine,
panic attack of some
watching
sort.
on his
Was
face,
it
but
possible
not
to be
listening.
terrified enough to start sweating in the cold? Whatever he was saying was interrupted by a loud bang on the door.
Bang, what?
Both of us looked up in
FBI.
time to see a guy around my age standing there. He peeked through the small window on the door and held up a couple papers that were graded. Mr. Ernie sighed and went to unlock the doorknob, letting the kid in. I realized in an instant that the guy was here for a studying session that teachers gave out sometimes.
Okay.
Mr. Ernie started to explain to him that he'd forgotten all about the session, his eyes darting
He's
towards me
definitely
every
not
now
a
and then
teacher.
as he pulled the student to the side. As the student distracted him, talking in hushed whispers, I grabbed my book bag silently and quickly made my way out of that
Think
room.
about he's a human.
I only allowed
homeless
myself to
man.
really
He just
breathe
goes
once
there
I was
to be
outside
warm.
of the class.
That's probably
On my way to my next class. Even then, my heartbeat was still frantic, and my thoughts were racing on creepy scenarios once again. What if he comes to get me after my next class? What will happen tomorrow during class?
Kidnapping.
Will he trap me in his classroom again?